Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. It was supposed to be just another Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen, sipping coffee, waiting for the kids to get up, and Claire was hurrying around the bedroom, getting ready for a work trip that would take her out of town for a few days. She was going through her pre-trip routine with her usual efficiency, double-checking her suitcase and neatly arranging things in her carry-on. I should have been used to these mornings by now. After all, she'd been in marketing for as long as I could remember, with regular trips to meet clients or attend conferences. But there was something different this time. Claire seemed almost too focused, like she was on autopilot, running through a list of tasks she had memorized. And when I kissed her goodbye, I felt her flinch just slightly, a strange tension in her shoulders as she pulled away with a tight smile. "Wish me luck," she called out cheerfully as she stepped toward the door. Her voice had a hollow ring to it, and as she waved, I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. "Good luck," I replied, forcing a smile, watching her as she left. The house felt quiet and still after she walked out the door, like it was holding its breath along with me. I told myself I was overthinking it. We'd been married for 15 years, had 2 beautiful kids, and built a comfortable life together. She was successful in her career, and I was proud of her for it. Why would there be anything to worry about? But something in the pit of my stomach kept nagging at me. Maybe it was the way she looked over her shoulder just before closing the door, or the way she checked her suitcase 3 times instead of her usual 2. I tried to brush it off and went about my day, finishing my coffee, getting the kids ready for school, and preparing for a work call. Just as I was packing up to head out, her phone, left behind on the counter, lit up with a message. I wasn't planning on checking it, but the notification preview caught my eye. I glanced down at the screen out of habit more than anything else, expecting a message from her friend or maybe her assistant. Instead, the message preview read, "Can't wait to see you tonight." My breath hitched, and I blinked, unsure if I'd read it correctly. The contact name was saved as Jessica. But I knew Claire's friends. There was no Jessica who would text her like that. My pulse quickened as I picked up the phone, my mind racing with questions. It felt wrong, invading her privacy, but I told myself it was just a glance. With a mix of guilt and dread, I opened the message thread. The last few exchanges were brief, alluding to a rendezvous and a dinner reservation that evening. As I read further back, my heart pounded harder with each message. It wasn't the kind of conversation 2 friends would have. And the closer I looked, the clearer it became, this was no woman named Jessica. This was a man. I felt like the floor had vanished beneath me. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing, trying to rationalize it away. But there it was, the words taunting me with their casual intimacy. I could feel anger bubbling up inside, hot and furious, but at the same time, a deep sadness settled over me. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I noticed? The next few hours were a blur. I went through the motions of work and errands, but my mind was locked on those messages, each one replaying in my mind like a line of evidence at a crime scene. I thought back to all her work trips, the late nights, the hastily packed bags, and all the little signs I'd ignored over the months. My stomach turned as I pieced it all together, the reality sinking in. By evening, I'd calmed down enough to think more clearly. If she was meeting this guy tonight, I could follow her, confront her, make a scene. But as satisfying as that idea sounded in the heat of my anger, I knew that wasn't the way to go. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my cool. If she could lie to my face for this long, I'd be the one to take control of how this would end. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the memories of our life together swirling around me. Our wedding day, the honeymoon, the house we bought, the life we built piece by piece. All of it seemed to mock me now, like a house of cards that had been teetering on the edge all along. But along with the sadness, a plan started to form in my mind. I'd give her one last chance to come clean, but if she didn't, I'd make sure she paid for every lie, every betrayal. And I'd do it with a calm she wouldn't expect. The next day, I told Claire that we should celebrate our wedding anniversary in a few weeks. Her face flickered with surprise before she put on a smile. She hadn't mentioned it, hadn't even suggested it, but I pretended not to notice. "Oh, that sounds wonderful, Alex," she said, her tone too light, too rehearsed. "Where were you thinking?" I shrugged, keeping my tone casual. "I was thinking of that little restaurant downtown you like. Candlelit dinner, just us." She nodded, the smile lingering just a bit too long, as if she were willing herself to look happy. I knew then that she'd already planned to be with him that night. The thought twisted like a knife, but I kept my expression neutral, nodding along as she suggested reservations and a fancy bottle of wine. Over the next few weeks, I watched her more closely, gathering every scrap of evidence I needed to set my plan in motion. I checked her phone when she was asleep, looked up her recent bank statements, even made a quiet call to her office one afternoon to verify her supposed business trips. The pieces fell into place, confirming what I'd already suspected. Our anniversary came, and I played my part perfectly. I'd booked a reservation at her favorite restaurant, even ordered a bouquet of her favorite flowers to be delivered to the table. I dressed up in the suit she liked, put on the cologne she'd given me on our first anniversary, and arrived early to make sure everything was perfect. When she walked in, wearing a dress that hugged her frame just right, a part of me felt a pang of the old love we'd once shared. But that feeling was quickly swallowed by the anger I'd been holding back for weeks. I forced a smile, complimented her, and pulled out her chair. She was radiant, laughing lightly, her hand touching mine as we talked. It was all an act, and I knew it. Halfway through our meal, after the main course was served, I leaned in, keeping my tone casual. "So, Claire, I talked to my lawyer this week. Just wanted to make sure our assets are organized, in case, things don't work out." She looked up, her eyes widening just a bit. "What do you mean?" Her voice trembled, and for the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely shaken. "Oh, nothing much," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Just that we should be prepared, in case one of us is dishonest." I gave her a hard look, watching as the color drained from her face. The silverware clinked as she put her fork down, her face going pale as her eyes darted around, searching for an excuse, anything to cling to. But there was nowhere to hide. I had her right where I wanted, and this time, she knew it. Claire's eyes darted around the restaurant, looking everywhere but at me. Her hands clenched her napkin, twisting it over and over until it looked like a knotted rope in her lap. I could see her calculating, deciding whether to come clean or try to talk her way out of it. Part of me hoped she'd tell the truth, that she'd apologize and beg forgiveness right then and there. But the other part, the part that had been living with this hidden anger for weeks, wanted her to lie again so I'd have an excuse to finish what I'd started. "Alex," she said, forcing a smile, though her voice wavered. "What's going on? Are you accusing me of something?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, keeping my face carefully neutral. "That depends," I replied evenly. "Is there something you need to confess, Claire?" She faltered, her eyes widening for a brief second before she regained control. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she fumbled for words. I don't know what you mean. I mean, I've been working a lot, and I know we haven't had as much time together, but..." She trailed off, searching my face for any hint of what I knew. I nodded, letting her stammer. "Working a lot, yeah. It's funny, because I was thinking about that too. All those work trips, those late nights, it's been hard on us, hasn't it?" "Yes," she said, her relief evident. "Exactly. I mean, work has been so demanding, and I've just been trying to keep up. I thought maybe that's why you've been so distant lately." She reached across the table, resting her hand on mine, trying to bring back some of the intimacy we used to share. But I didn't take her hand. Instead, I held her gaze, letting the silence stretch between us. So, what's his name? She froze, her hand going stiff on top of mine. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, her face a perfect mask of shock and fear. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her. Almost. Alex, what are you talking about? I sighed, pulling my hand back. Come on, Claire. We both know what I'm talking about. The messages, the hotel charges, the unexplained late nights. I let each word hang in the air, watching her expression change with every accusation. She drew back, her voice barely above a whisper. You looked at my phone. I laughed, a cold sound that felt foreign in my throat. It doesn't really matter how I found out, does it? What matters is that I know. Claire's shoulders slumped, the defiance fading from her face. Her gaze dropped to the table, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her napkin again. Alex, I never wanted to hurt you, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't mean for this to happen. The anger I'd been holding back boiled over, but I kept my tone steady, low enough that the other tables wouldn't overhear. Didn't mean for it to happen. You lied to my face for months, Claire. You made me think that you were traveling for work, that everything was fine between us. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? She reached for my hand again, her eyes pleading. Please, Alex, just let me explain. I know I messed up, but I still love you. I do. Love? I spat, pulling my hand back. You're sitting here, telling me you love me after spending God knows how many nights with him. Do you even hear yourself? She winced, the tears finally spilling over, leaving streaks down her cheeks. I know. I know it sounds terrible, but it's complicated. I didn't, he doesn't mean anything to me. I was just. I don't even know why I did it. I scoffed, the anger simmering hotter. Let me guess, you were lonely. Neglected? Is that it? It's my fault because I was too focused on work, or the kids, or whatever other excuse you can come up with. She shook her head, her voice cracking. No, Alex, it wasn't like that. I mean, maybe it was, but it's not your fault. I don't know how to explain it. I made a mistake. I watched her, unmoved by her tears, by her attempt to make me feel sorry for her. She'd already had her chance to explain herself, and it was too late for apologies now. A mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. This wasn't a mistake, Claire. This was a choice. A choice you made, over and over again. Her shoulders shook as she tried to wipe her tears, but I didn't give her time to catch her breath. You know, I thought we had a real partnership, I said, my voice cold and steady. I thought we were building a life together, raising a family, creating something that would last. But I guess I was wrong. Please, Alex, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Please, don't say that. I'm sorry. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll end it. I'll go to therapy, whatever it takes. Just, don't throw everything away over one mistake. I shook my head, feeling the last traces of sympathy evaporate. I'm not the one who threw it away, Claire. You did that the moment you decided to lie to me. I stood up, reaching for my wallet. Consider this dinner a parting gift, I said, tossing enough cash on the table to cover the check. Pack your things and be out of the house by tomorrow. I'll make arrangements for the kids. She gasped, reaching for my arm. Alex, wait. Please, don't do this. We can work through this. We can fix it. I looked down at her, feeling nothing but emptiness where my love for her had once been. There's nothing left to fix. With that, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, ignoring the stares of the other diners, their curiosity like pinpricks on my skin. Outside, the night air hit me like a slap, cool and sharp, and I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'd just shattered my entire life, torn it apart in one brutal conversation. And yet, as I stood there, staring up at the stars, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt free. Back home, I found myself standing in the doorway of our bedroom, the room Claire and I had shared for the past 15 years. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting shadows across the bed, the neatly made pillows, the small touches of her, perfume on the dresser, a book on her nightstand with a bookmark halfway through. It felt strange to be here alone, knowing she wouldn't be coming back tonight. The silence weighed heavily, and I stood there, letting the memories wash over me. For a moment, I could almost hear her laugh, feel her hand on my shoulder, the warmth of her voice in the quiet of the night. But the images were tainted now, darkened by betrayal. I spent the night on the living room couch, drifting in and out of sleep as memories of our marriage played out in my mind. Every small kindness, every loving moment, felt tainted, like a lie that had finally unraveled. By dawn, I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through everything I needed to do. This was going to be a long day, but I had to keep my resolve. Around 8, I heard her car pull up outside. I stayed seated, sipping my coffee as I listened to her footsteps approach the door. The sound of her key scraping against the lock felt harsh in the quiet morning. I waited, watching the door slowly open, and she stepped inside, her face pale and exhausted, as if she hadn't slept at all either. "Alex," she started, her voice hesitant. She looked around, as if expecting me to fly into a rage, to start shouting, but I was done with that. My anger had turned to something colder, something I knew she wouldn't expect. I stayed silent, my gaze steady as I gestured for her to sit down on the couch across from me. She hesitated but finally sank onto the edge, wringing her hands in her lap. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, searching my face for any sign of forgiveness. "I didn't sleep," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "I kept thinking about everything." I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch before finally responding. "I imagine you have a lot to think about." My voice came out calm, almost detached, as if I were watching this scene from outside my own body. "Alex, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I hurt you, and I know you're angry, but we've built so much together. Is there any way we can fix this?" "Fix this?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "How exactly do you expect me to do that? Should I pretend it never happened, ignore all the lies? Go back to how things were?" She swallowed, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "No. I know I can't expect that. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust again. I know I don't deserve it, but I love you, Alex. I don't want to lose you." I felt a bitter smile tug at the corners of my mouth. "Funny, you say that now. When did you realize that? After dinner with him? Or did it take longer?" She flinched, a small gasp escaping her. "It was a mistake, Alex. I lost my way. I know that doesn't excuse anything, but I just thought things were slipping away between us. I thought," she broke off, pressing her hand to her mouth, as if the words themselves were too painful to voice. "You thought what?" I asked coldly. "That an affair would bring us closer. That it would somehow fix whatever you thought was wrong with us." She shook her head, her face crumpling. "No, I didn't think it through. It was stupid, impulsive. I don't even know why I did it. I wasn't thinking. I know that sounds like an excuse, but I was. I don't know, looking for something. I don't even know what." I watched her for a long moment, letting her words sink in. "And you think that excuses it?" "No, I don't." Her voice was barely a whisper. "But I love you. I love our family. I want to try to make things right. Right? I laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. You want to make things right? Claire, there's no going back from this. You made your choices. You didn't just lie once, you lied over and over again, every time you left this house, every time you looked me in the eyes and pretended everything was normal. How do you expect me to forget that? She bit her lip, fresh tears slipping down her cheeks. I don't know. I don't. But, we've been together so long. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It did, I said, my voice hardening. It meant everything to me. But apparently, it wasn't enough for you. I paused, watching her face crumble. You need to leave, Claire. You need to pack up your things and go. I'll make arrangements for the kids, and I'll figure out the legal details, but you're not staying here. The color drained from her face, and for a moment, I thought she might faint. Alex, please, think about this. The kids. The kids will be fine, I interrupted, my tone sharp. I'll explain it to them in a way they'll understand. But I'm not going to pretend to be some happy family for their sake. They deserve better than that. She stood, her body shaking, looking at me like a stranger. And what about us? You're just going to throw it all away? I felt a surge of anger rise, but I forced it back down. I'm not throwing anything away, Claire. You already did that. She stared at me for a long time, as if hoping I'd soften, that I'd change my mind. But there was nothing left to say. Finally, she nodded, her expression broken, and turned toward the bedroom to pack her things. I watched her disappear down the hallway, her footsteps heavy, her shoulders slumped. Part of me almost felt a flicker of sympathy, a ghost of the love I used to feel. But it was too little, too late. She'd made her choices, and now we both had to live with the consequences. A few hours later, she came back out, her suitcases in hand. She paused by the door, looking back at me one last time, as if searching for a sign of forgiveness. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice choked with tears. I really am. I nodded, feeling numb. So am I. I didn't trust myself to say more. She waited, as if hoping for some last-minute reprieve, but when I stayed silent, she finally stepped outside, closing the door softly behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. In the days that followed Claire's departure, the house was quieter than I'd ever remembered. It was unsettling, almost eerie. At first, I tried to keep myself busy, focusing on the kids and the logistics of rearranging our lives. I'd told them, gently, that Claire needed some time away and that we'd figure out a new arrangement soon. They didn't ask too many questions, maybe they sensed that there were questions even I couldn't answer. But when the silence crept in after they went to bed, it became harder to ignore. I found myself pacing through the empty house at night, replaying every conversation I'd had with Claire, every shared laugh, every kiss. The anger that had once driven me, that had made it easy to shut her out, started to give way to something hollow and raw, a grief that gnawed at me from within. I realized, slowly, that I was grieving not just for the betrayal but for the life we'd once shared, for the dreams we'd built together that had all been torn apart. About 2 weeks after she left, I heard from Claire's lawyer. She had filed for divorce. The papers were delivered to the office, and seeing them, holding that cold legal document in my hands, made everything feel startlingly real. Our marriage, reduced to words on paper. I felt a familiar rage building as I signed my name, but it was weaker now, tempered by exhaustion. I wanted to hate her, but the anger had worn thin, leaving only the ache of betrayal. A few days later, I got a call from her mother, Susan. It was strange, she and I had always been on good terms, but after everything that had happened, I'd assumed she would side with Claire. When I picked up, her voice was brittle, hesitant, as though she were afraid of what she was about to say. Alex, she began softly. I wanted to let you know. Claire's been staying with me. She's not doing well. I thought you should know. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my voice steady. She made her choices, Susan. She didn't care about what this would do to me or the kids. I know, Susan replied, her voice catching. But, Alex, it's worse than that. She's barely eating. She hardly talks. I've never seen her like this. She paused, taking a shaky breath. Look, I know what she did was unforgivable. But, if there's anything you can do to help, I think it would mean a lot to her. To us. I gripped the phone, torn. The thought of reaching out to her, of comforting the person who had caused me so much pain, felt almost absurd. But beneath the anger, I felt something else, a shadow of compassion. Memories of our life together surfaced, fragments of the love we'd once shared, and I realized, bitterly, that some part of me still cared. All right, I finally managed, surprised at my own words. Tell her I'll stop by tomorrow. We can talk, if she's up for it. When I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at my phone. I wasn't sure what I expected from this meeting, closure, maybe, or at least a chance to understand. But I felt restless, as though I were standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite define. The next day, I made the drive to her mother's house. Susan met me at the door, her face drawn with worry. She didn't say much, just gave me a nod and led me to Claire's room. My heart pounded as I approached the door, unsure what I would find. A part of me almost wished I hadn't come, that I could have left things as they were. But it was too late now. I knocked gently and opened the door. Claire was sitting on the bed, her hair disheveled, her face pale and gaunt. She looked up, and for a moment, her eyes brightened in recognition before her gaze dropped again, her expression one of quiet defeat. She looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Alex, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't think you'd come. I took a step inside, closing the door softly behind me. I'm here, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Susan said you weren't doing well. She gave a hollow laugh, her hands twisting in her lap. That's putting it mildly. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever take back. But I never wanted it to end like this. I didn't think I'd lose everything. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions, anger, sadness, pity, all swirling together in a painful knot. Then why did you do it, Claire? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why throw away everything we had? She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know. I thought, maybe I was looking for something I thought I'd lost. I felt like we were drifting apart, like I was losing you. I know that doesn't justify anything. I know that. But I was stupid. I don't even know what I wanted. Her words broke something in me, and I felt a wave of sorrow rising, choking me. I had come here hoping for answers, but now I realized that nothing she could say would make any of this easier to understand. We had been broken long before the affair, I just hadn't wanted to see it. She reached out, taking my hand in hers, her fingers cold and trembling. I'm sorry, Alex, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve it, but I still love you. I don't know if I'll ever stop loving you. I closed my eyes, feeling her hand in mine, the familiar warmth of her touch, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to remember what we once had. Claire, I began, but the words died in my throat. There was nothing left to say. Suddenly, Claire's hand slipped from mine, her body sagging against the bed. Her breathing grew shallow, her skin turning an ashen gray. My heart raced as I leaned over her, panic flooding my mind. Claire! Claire, what's wrong? She looked up at me, her eyes unfocused, as if seeing something far away. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice faint, barely audible. And then, just like that, her eyes drifted shut, her breathing slowing until it stopped altogether. I called for Susan, my voice frantic, but I knew, even as she rushed in, that it was too late. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but the paramedics confirmed what I already feared. Claire was gone. In the days that followed, I found myself haunted by the memory of that last conversation, of her final, broken apology. She'd been right, I would never forgive her. But her death left a hollow ache, a wound that went deeper than anger or betrayal. I had wanted justice, closure. But in the end, I'd been left with nothing but sorrow. I often wondered if, deep down, she had known this was coming, if she had felt something that I couldn't see. But there would never be answers, only the lingering ache of a love that had once been real, fractured beyond repair, leaving me with only a ghost of what could have been.